She let a wounded cowboy sleep in her barn. Next day he signed over 2,000 acres in her name. Before we continue, please ensure to like, share and subscribe. Thank you. The storm that rolled in that night was fierce, the kind that turned dirt roads to rivers and made the barn doors moan under the pressure of the wind. Emma wrestled with the hinges, struggling to lock the doors tight against the howling gusts and the pounding rain. Her flashlight flickered as lightning cut jagged lines across the sky, briefly illuminating the dark corners of her property. She turned to leave, ready to return to the safety of her farmhouse, when something strange caught her eye. Near the far end of the barn, half hidden in shadow and soaked hay, was the slumped figure of a man. She froze. He wasn't just wet, he was hurt. Mud clung to his torn clothes, and blood stained the sleeve of his shirt. He looked up just long enough for their eyes to meet, and what Emma saw there stopped her breath. It wasn't just pain, it was sorrow, the kind that ran deep, the kind that didn't need words to be understood. Fear gnawed at her edges. She lived alone. This man could be dangerous. But something in her heart pushed past the fear. He was broken. And right now, he needed help. Without a word, Emma moved toward him. His body went limp in her arms as she helped him to the far side of the barn. She cleared a space in the hay, dragged over a few old blankets from the supply shelf, and eased him down gently. Thunder roared above them, but inside, it was quiet save for the soft wheeze of his breath. His skin was cold, his clothes soaked through. Emma worked with steady hands, tugging off his wet boots and wrapping his body in quilts. She didn't ask who he was or why he was out here alone, bleeding in a storm. All that mattered was that he was here, and he needed her. She lit the old lantern by the stall and crouched beside him, inspecting the wound on his arm. It wasn't life-threatening, but it needed cleaning. She fetched water from the pump and dabbed gently at the torn flesh with a rag, her hands trembling more from the adrenaline than the cold. All the while, the man said nothing. He just watched her, his eyes heavy, tracking her every movement with a strange mix of caution and trust. Emma didn't speak either. Words felt unnecessary. Instead, she stayed with him, checking his temperature, making sure he was warm and still breathing. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside that barn, something quiet and powerful had begun to take root. She didn't know it yet, but that night, by opening her door to a wounded stranger, Emma had also opened her life to something far bigger than she ever imagined. What started as an act of compassion would soon unfold into a story no one in the valley would forget. Golden rays of morning light slipped through the wooden slats of the barn, casting stripes across the floor like quiet whispers of a new day. Dust floated gently in the air, and the storm from the night before had passed, leaving behind the sharp scent of damp hay and fresh earth. Emma stood quietly by the stall, her arms folded across her chest, watching the stranger she had taken in just hours ago. He stirred slowly, his body shifting beneath the thick quilt she had wrapped around him. His eyelids fluttered open, confusion clouding his gaze as he tried to sit up. Emma stepped forward without a word and knelt beside him. He blinked, trying to focus on her face. There was a long pause before he finally croaked out one word, water. She nodded once, disappearing briefly and returning with a tin cup filled from the kitchen pump. He drank slowly, carefully, his hand trembling slightly as he held it. He didn't thank her, didn't offer any explanation. But Emma didn't ask. She didn't press him for a name, a story, or a reason. She simply stood, nodded again, and told him, softly, that she'd be back in a minute. True to her word, she returned with a small bowl of warm soup and a spoon. She crouched beside him again and gently offered the first bite, and then the next. He accepted it all in silence, chewing carefully, his eyes never fully leaving her face. Emma fed him like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she'd known him for years. Afterward, she rose without fuss, setting the bowl aside and heading out to begin her morning chores. The barn needed sweeping, the hens would be hungry, and the fences still had storm damage. She worked with steady hands, glancing toward the stall now and then, checking that he was still breathing, still resting. But she never asked what he was doing on her land. She didn't need to. The man watched her from his nest of blankets, his gaze following her every move. Pain was still etched deep into the lines of his face, physical and something much older, heavier. But beneath it, something else began to take hold. Not comfort, not yet. But something gentler. Trust. No one had offered him care without demand in a long time. He wasn't used to kindness that asked for nothing in return. Yet Emma, with her quiet strength and gentle hands, gave it freely. She treated him not as a burden, but as if he belonged. Outside, the sun continued to rise, pushing back the memory of the storm. Inside, amidst the smell of hay and healing, something fragile had begun to grow. Emma didn't speak of the past, and the man didn't offer it. But in that silence, a new kind of understanding bloomed, one that neither of them would be able to ignore for long. The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in warm hues of orange and lavender as Emma carried 2 plates of food out to the porch. The air smelled of pine and the lingering rain from the night before. The boards creaked beneath her boots as she walked to the old wooden bench, setting the plates down gently. Cornbread, thick beef stew, and a mason jar of sweet tea. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. The stranger stepped out slowly, still limping from his injuries, his movements careful, like each step was a test of trust. His clothes were cleaner now, borrowed from an old chest in Emma's attic, and he looked like he belonged there, rough around the edges, but calm. He didn't speak as he lowered himself onto the bench beside her. Emma handed him his plate without a word, then sat down with her own. They ate in silence at first, the sound of spoons clinking gently against the bowls blending with the distant chirp of crickets. The air between them wasn't tense, just quiet. Emma didn't ask for his name. She didn't need it. The man beside her wasn't ready to give it, and she respected that. But halfway through his stew, he spoke. "I used to have land," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Big land. My father passed it down to me." Emma kept her eyes on her bowl, but her attention sharpened. She didn't interrupt. "Family fought over it," he continued after a long pause. "Cousin wanted it all. Made deals behind my back. One night, things got ugly. Someone came out to my place. Said it was a warning. Left me with a bullet in my side and a contract with my name forged at the bottom." He paused, his grip tightening around the spoon. Emma finally looked at him, her eyes steady and calm. "I barely made it out," he added, swallowing hard. "Didn't have anywhere to go. I just kept writing." Emma nodded slowly, taking in the weight of what he said. She didn't ask for more. The porch light buzzed gently overhead, casting a golden halo over them as the evening deepened. "I don't know why I stopped here," he said. "Didn't plan it." Emma offered a soft smile. "Maybe you were supposed to." He looked at her, searching her face for something, judgment, curiosity, anything. But there was only quiet understanding. The porch became more than just a resting place, it became a haven, a space suspended from time where pain didn't need to be explained and silence didn't feel empty. They both carried scars. Emma, from things she never spoke of, and he, from things that had nearly cost him his life. In that simple meal, in that gentle moment, they found something rare. A woman who had lost everything. A man who had everything to lose. And yet, on that porch, neither was alone. The morning sun had barely crept over the hills when Emma stirred from sleep, the scent of damp earth still lingering in the air. The house was quiet, too quiet. Something in her chest tightened. She slipped into her boots, pulled on a flannel jacket, and stepped out into the brisk dawn. Dew clung to the grass like silver dust. Birds had just begun to sing. She made her way to the barn, brushing sleep from her eyes. The door creaked open, and the moment she stepped inside, she knew. The space where he'd lain, tucked in blankets and hay, was empty. The quilts were folded neatly to the side, his boots gone, not a single sign left behind. Even the faint scent of gunpowder and sweat had faded. He was gone. Emma stood still, stunned. No goodbye. No scribbled note. No trail of footprints in the mud. She'd known he wasn't the kind to stay, but still, the silence he left behind hurt more than she'd expected. She walked back to the house in a daze, the echo of his absence loud in her ears. When she opened the front door, something on the kitchen table caught her eye. A single envelope, thick and cream-colored, resting in the center as if it had always belonged there. She approached slowly, her hands beginning to tremble. Her name was scrawled on the front in heavy, dark ink. She opened it with cautious fingers, expecting maybe a thank you, maybe an apology. But what fell out wasn't a letter. It was a document, an official land deed, stamped, signed, sealed. Her heart slammed against her ribs as her eyes scanned the words. 2,000 acres. Transferred into her name. Effective immediately. Emma dropped into the nearest chair, breath shallow, the paper shaking in her hands. Her name stared back at her in bold black letters, so formal, so final. It didn't feel real. She blinked once. Twice. But the truth was there, etched in ink and legality. He had left her everything. She remembered his quiet gaze, the way he never asked for anything, not even when he was bleeding. He had spoken so little, but in this, he'd said everything. A wounded man with nothing left had given her more than she ever dreamed of having. Not as repayment. Not as pity. But as a gift, a thank you for kindness she had offered without asking for anything in return. Tears welled in her eyes. Not from sadness. From awe. From the realization that in one silent act, her life had been rewritten. Emma clutched the deed to her chest, heart pounding with disbelief and a strange sense of hope. She didn't know where he had gone or if she would ever see him again. But she knew this, he had come to her broken, and in return, had given her the chance to begin again. Emma stood in the registrar's office, the scent of old paper and polished wood surrounding her like the walls of a courthouse. The land deed trembled in her hands as she handed it over the counter. The clerk, an older man with wire-framed glasses and a skeptical frown, took the document and read it carefully. Minutes passed, each second heavy with anticipation. Then he looked up, first at the paper, then at her, his expression shifting from doubt to disbelief. "This is real," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Legal. Stamped. Filed just yesterday." Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was true. Hours later, she drove through the wide, rusted iron gates of the property listed on the deed. The ranch sprawled before her like something out of a dream. Rolling pastures stretched toward the horizon, dotted with groves of cottonwood trees. A breeze lifted her hair as she stepped out of her truck, the smell of grass and clean wind filling her lungs. And there, in the distance, wild horses ran free across the open land, their hooves pounding the earth like distant thunder. She stood silently, overwhelmed. This land, these 2,000 untouched, sunlit acres, belonged to her now. Not by inheritance, not by struggle, but by the will of a man who had vanished without a trace. A man who had arrived in her life like a storm and left just as quickly, but who had given her more than she'd ever thought possible. Emma walked forward slowly, her boots sinking into the rich soil. Every step felt sacred, heavy with meaning. The weight of hardship that had clung to her shoulders for years seemed to lift with the breeze. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving. She was beginning. And not just beginning anywhere, but here, on land that whispered stories and promised freedom. She paused near a weathered fence post and let her fingers brush against the dry wood. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. He hadn't left a note or a reason, just a deed with her name. But as she looked around at the open sky and golden fields, she realized she didn't need an explanation. His gift was his goodbye. And yet, Emma felt him in the wind, in the distant echo of hooves, in the silent promise this land now held. Maybe he knew she'd make something of it. Maybe he believed in her more than she had ever believed in herself. She looked to the horizon, her heart full, not with questions, but with quiet certainty. This land was hers. And with it, a new life, a new chapter, and a chance to grow something beautiful from the ashes of everything she thought she'd lost. It didn't take long for the town to start talking. Whispered voices filled the general store, the post office, and the diner, bouncing from one table to the next like wildfire on a dry day. Emma McCall, the quiet woman who once struggled to keep her small property afloat, was now the owner of a sprawling 2,000-acre ranch, a gift from a mysterious cowboy who vanished as quickly as he had arrived. They called it everything from fate to a fairy tale. In hushed tones over morning coffee, the old-timers traded theories. One claimed the man had once belonged to the famed Duval ranching dynasty, rumored to be fractured by legal feuds and old grudges. Another swore he had seen him years ago on wanted posters in another state, suggesting the cowboy was on the run from something darker, a past too heavy to carry. No one really knew the truth. But no one dared challenge the deed. It was legal. It was sealed. And it bore Emma's name. She kept her head down through it all, letting the whispers wash over her. Gossip didn't interest her. The only truth she cared about was the land beneath her feet and the quiet knowledge that she had been trusted with something rare. The man hadn't left her a story to tell. He had left her a future. With determination burning brighter than the speculation, Emma threw herself into the ranch. She met with contractors, mended broken fences, and cleared overgrown trails. The barn needed a new roof. The pasture gates needed fixing. The old cattle pens were rusty but salvageable. She tackled it all with grit and quiet pride, her sleeves rolled up and her boots caked in dust. Neighbors who once barely waved now offered help, tools, advice, even hands for labor. They were curious, yes, but there was respect there too. Emma hadn't inherited wealth by blood or bought it through fortune. She had earned it with compassion, even if no one could quite explain how. And in everything she did, from restoring the farmhouse porch to walking the vast fields at sunset, Emma kept the cowboy in her heart. He had given her something she hadn't dared to dream of, and she intended to honor it not just by keeping it, but by building something that would last. The wind still swept across the plains in the evening, and sometimes, when she stood in the quiet of twilight, Emma could almost feel him there. Not in shadow, not in memory, but in presence. In the land, in the strength he saw in her, in the silent bond between two souls who met in the middle of a storm and changed each other's lives without a single promise made. Whatever the town believed, she knew one thing for certain: the land was hers. And so was the legacy she was building, one fence post, one sunrise, one unspoken promise at a time. The last traces of winter had just begun to fade when Emma noticed the land changing once more. Frost melted from the edges of the fences, and the soil beneath her boots softened, rich with promise. Birds returned to the trees, and wildflowers pressed through the thawing earth. It was spring, quiet and awakening. She stood on the edge of the northern pasture that morning, inspecting the new fence line, her gloves thick with mud and her jacket still zipped against the chill. The air was crisp, but the sun shone with the gentle warmth of new beginnings. Then came a sound she hadn't heard in months, the steady, slow shuffle of boots on gravel. Emma froze. She turned, breath caught midair, and her heart stuttered in her chest. There he was. He stood by the gate, upright, steady, and whole. No blood. No pain carved across his features. His clothes were clean, his eyes clear. He hadn't come like a ghost or a shadow. He came like a man who had found his way home. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world hushed around them. The wind stilled, the birds paused in song, as if time had caught its breath. Then, a faint smile touched his lips. "I didn't give you that land to disappear," he said, his voice warm, laced with the same quiet strength she remembered. Emma laughed, not out of amusement, but from the sheer weight of emotion rising in her chest. It was a laugh wrapped in disbelief, laced with relief, and carried on the edge of a tear she didn't let fall. "I didn't build it up to forget," she replied. They moved toward each other slowly, with no rush, no urgency, just gravity. As they stood face to face on the land that had become more than dirt and boundaries, a silence settled between them again. But it was different now. This silence wasn't made of fear or uncertainty. It was filled with everything they didn't need to say out loud: gratitude, trust, and the possibility of something more. The land had once been a gift. Now it was a bridge. His eyes scanned the pastures, the new fences, the repaired barn roof, and the life she had grown from the ground up. He didn't speak of where he had gone or what ghosts he had faced. And she didn't ask. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he had come back, not as a stranger, but as a man who had returned not to escape, but to stay. The wind picked up again, light and cool, rustling the grass and carrying the scent of pine and earth between them. As they stood together in the middle of the vast open ranch, everything came full circle. Emma knew her story had changed the day she led a wounded cowboy into her barn. Now, the story was theirs to continue, together. If you enjoyed the story, please remember to like, share and subscribe.